Hey guys, tonight we begin with silk, servitude, and systemic suffering. We're diving deep into the glittering gilded cage of life as a concubine in the emperor's imperial harem in ancient China, where your worth was measured in suns, and your survival depended on navigating palace politics deadlier than any battlefield. Forget the romantic meetings and elegant courtesans you've seen in C-dramas. Tonight, we're exploring the brutal reality of what it meant to be human property in imperial China, where your beauty was both your salvation and your curse, and where a single misstep could mean exile, execution, or worse, being forgotten entirely. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 14 years old, and today your life as you knew it ends forever. The Imperial Talent Scouts have come to your village, and congratulations, you've been selected. Not for your intelligence, not for your character, not for your dreams or aspirations. You've been chosen because your face fits the current emperor's particular preferences, and your family's desperate poverty makes you expendable. Your parents are receiving a small payment. Think of it as a dowry in reverse. They're being compensated for the loss of their daughter, though everyone involved understands this is really just a transaction disguised as an honour. Your mother cries as she packs your few possessions into a cloth bundle, but whether those tears are from genuine grief or relief that there's now one less mouth to feed, you'll never know. The other girls selected from your region sit silent in the ox cart, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and bewilderment. You're all trying to process the same impossible reality. Yesterday, you were helping with the harvest, worried about whether there would be enough grain to last the winter. Today, you're being transported to the Forbidden City to become the property of the most powerful man in the world. The journey takes weeks. You sleep on the ground, eat whatever scraps the guards provide, and slowly watch your old life disappear behind you like smoke. The other girls whisper at night about what awaits you. Some have heard stories of concubines who gained power and influence, who lived in luxury and bore princes. Others speak in hushed tones about the unfortunate ones who were forgotten, who lived and died in obscurity, their names never recorded in any history. What none of you understand yet is that both versions are true, and which fate awaits you depends entirely on factors beyond your control: timing, luck, politics, and the emperor's whims. Your beauty got you selected, but it won't guarantee your survival. As the walls of the Forbidden City finally come into view, rising like a mountain of red and gold against the sky, you feel your stomach drop. Those walls aren't just keeping intruders out, they're keeping you in. For the rest of your life, however long or short that might be, this will be your entire world. Welcome to your new home. 180 acres of the most beautiful prison ever constructed. The Forbidden City is magnificent in a way that makes your village hut look like a pile of sticks. Everything is massive, ornate, and designed to make you feel as small and insignificant as possible. The courtyards are larger than your entire village. The buildings tower overhead like temples to power itself, and everywhere you look, there are reminders that you are now just one tiny replaceable component in a vast imperial machine. You're processed like livestock. Your name, your background, your family, all of it is recorded in ledgers by eunuchs who regard you with the same interest they might show a new shipment of rice. You're bathed, examined for diseases and defects, and assigned a rank so low it barely qualifies as a rank at all. You're now a selected lady, which sounds elegant until you realise there are 13 ranks above you, and the chances of ever advancing beyond the bottom tier are roughly equivalent to being struck by lightning. Your living quarters are a small room that you share with 3 other girls. It's not a room, really. It's more like a closet with pretensions. Your bed is a wooden platform with a thin mat, and your possessions fit in a small chest that doubles as a stool. The walls are paper thin, so you can hear everything. Conversations, arguments, crying, and the sound of girls trying to muffle their sobs into their thin pillows. Privacy? What's that? You're never alone. Ever. There are always eunuchs watching, other concubines listening, and servants reporting. Every word you speak, every expression that crosses your face, every friendship you attempt to form, all of it is observed, recorded, and potentially used against you. You're living in a surveillance state where paranoia isn't a mental illness. It's a survival strategy. The rules are endless and arbitrary. You can't speak unless spoken to by anyone of higher rank. You can't eat certain foods, wear certain colours, or walk in certain areas. You can't send letters to your family, and you can't receive visitors. You can't even look directly at the Emperor if you're ever fortunate enough to encounter him. Your entire existence is defined by what you cannot do, and the punishment for breaking these rules ranges from public humiliation to execution. But here's the thing that makes it truly nightmarish. You're not just trapped physically, you're trapped mentally. Your success, your survival, your very sense of self-worth now depends entirely on gaining the attention and favour of a man who has hundreds of other women competing for the same thing. You've been placed in a system specifically designed to turn women against each other, where your fellow prisoners are also your greatest rivals. Congratulations. You're now living in the world's most luxurious concentration camp, and your only hope of escape is death. You quickly learn that the imperial harem isn't just a collection of women, it's a carefully constructed pyramid of desperation, where every level above you represents someone who has succeeded in climbing over the broken dreams of others. At the bottom, where you currently reside, are the selected ladies. You're barely a step above the servants, and sometimes the servants actually have more security than you do. They at least know they'll be fed and housed as long as they perform their duties. You're completely expendable. If you don't catch the Emperor's eye within a reasonable time frame, you'll simply age out of contention and spend the rest of your life in service to the women who are luckier, more beautiful, or more ruthless than you. Above you are the female attendants who have managed to achieve the incredible feat of being noticed by the Emperor without actually sleeping with him. They assist the higher-ranking concubines and have slightly better living conditions. Their own rooms, better food, and the precious commodity of hope. They still have a chance. Then come the consorts, the concubines, the noble consorts, and so on, each rank representing another level of success in the brutal competition for imperial attention. At the very top sits the Empress, who achieved the ultimate prize, producing a male heir who survived to adulthood. She's the only woman in the entire complex who has anything approaching security, and even then, she's constantly looking over her shoulder at the younger, more beautiful women below her. The hierarchy isn't just about titles, it's about survival. Higher-ranking concubines get better food, better housing, better medical care, and most importantly, better protection from the arbitrary cruelties that can destroy a life in an instant. They also get to inflict those same cruelties on the women below them, because nothing maintains a power structure quite like giving the oppressed a chance to oppress someone else. You watch the interactions between the different ranks, and it's like observing a carefully choreographed dance of deference and dominance. The way a noble consort can destroy a selected lady's day with a single dismissive glance. The way a consort can have a female attendant punished for imaginary slights. The way everyone below the Empress lives in constant fear of displeasing someone above them. And here's the cruel genius of the system. It works. The women don't unite against their common oppressor. They turn on each other. Every other concubine is a potential threat. Every friendship is a potential betrayal. Every alliance is temporary and conditional. You're surrounded by women who are going through the exact same nightmare you are, and you can't trust any of them. The woman sleeping in the bed next to you might be your closest companion, sharing whispered fears and desperate hopes in the darkness. She might also be the one who reports your conversations to the eunuchs, hoping that betraying you will somehow improve her own position. You'll never know which version of her is real, and that uncertainty becomes another form of torture. Welcome to the most psychologically sophisticated prison ever devised, where the inmates are the guards, and the guards are the inmates, and everyone is desperately trying to climb a ladder made of human suffering. Your days begin at dawn with the sound of gongs echoing through the courtyards, and from that moment until you collapse back onto your thin mat at night, your life is a masterclass in organised emptiness. You wake up, perform your morning ablutions, which consist of washing your face in cold water and hoping your teeth don't fall out, and dress in the simple robes that mark your bottom tier status. Then you wait and wait and wait some more. You're waiting for the emperor to notice you, but here's the thing. He's busy running an empire of millions of people, dealing with rebellions, natural disasters, political intrigue, and the small matter of maintaining his divine mandate from heaven. The odds of him even laying eyes on you are astronomically small, and the odds of him actually remembering you afterward are even smaller. But you wait anyway, because what else can you do? Your days are filled with activities designed to keep you busy, while accomplishing absolutely nothing meaningful. You learn to play musical instruments you'll never perform for anyone who matters. You practice calligraphy that will never be read. You study poetry that will never be appreciated. You're receiving an education in uselessness, becoming skilled at arts that exist solely to make you more ornamental. The other concubines gossip constantly about the emperor's preferences, his moods, his schedule, his habits. They analyse every rumour, every second-hand account, every glimpse of him in the distance, like scholars studying ancient texts. Does he prefer women who are quiet and submissive, or ones who show intelligence and wit? Does he like traditional beauty, or is he drawn to more exotic features? Has he been visiting the quarters of younger concubines lately, or is he focusing on the more established ones? None of this speculation matters, because you have absolutely no control over any of it. You can't change your appearance, your personality, or your circumstances. You can't force an encounter, can't manufacture chemistry, can't guarantee that you'll be in the right place at the right time. You're a passive participant in your own fate, waiting for someone else to decide whether your life has any value. The waiting is punctuated by brief moments of hope that are somehow more torturous than the despair. A eunuch mentions that the emperor will be walking through your courtyard next week. A rumour spreads that he's looking for new favourites. Another concubine claims she heard your name mentioned in passing by someone who knows someone who works in the emperor's chambers. These moments of possibility are like drops of water in a desert. They keep you alive, but they also remind you how thirsty you are. You spend hours preparing for an encounter that might never happen, perfecting your appearance, rehearsing what you might say, imagining how you might catch his attention. Then the moment passes, nothing happens, and you're back to waiting. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. You watch other girls arrive, younger and more beautiful than you, and you feel your own stock declining like fruit rotting in the sun. You're aging out of contention, becoming invisible, transforming from a potential favourite into just another piece of furniture in the imperial collection. The cruelest part is that you can't even mourn your lost opportunities, because you never really had any opportunities to begin with. You were selected not because you were special, but because you were available. You were brought here not to be loved, but to be owned. And now you're slowly realising that ownership doesn't require attention, affection, or even acknowledgement. You're discovering that you can be completely ignored by the person who controls your entire existence, and that this indifference is somehow worse than hatred. At least hatred would be a form of recognition. 6 months into your new life, you're beginning to understand that survival in the Forbidden City requires skills they don't teach in any village. You need to become a diplomat, a spy, a psychologist, and a strategist, all while maintaining the facade of being a simple, innocent girl from the countryside. The first rule of harem politics is that there are no rules, only consequences. What got someone promoted yesterday might get you executed today. What worked for one concubine might destroy another. The emperor's preferences change like the weather, and the political landscape shifts constantly as different factions rise and fall within the imperial court. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate who's in favour and who's falling from grace. A concubine who suddenly starts receiving fewer visits from the emperor, a reduction in her servants, a change in her seating arrangement during formal ceremonies. These are all indicators that her star is waning, and smart concubines start distancing themselves before the inevitable fall. The eunuchs are your most important allies and your most dangerous enemies. They're the ones who control access to the emperor, who manage the daily operations of the harem, who decide which concubines get better quarters and which ones get forgotten. They're also the ones who can destroy you with a single negative report, a misplaced word, or a manufactured scandal. Building relationships with the eunuchs requires a delicate balance. You need to be respectful, but not obsequious, generous, but not obviously bribing, memorable, but not threatening. You learn to slip them small gifts, a piece of jewellery, a sweet pastry, a compliment about their efficiency, while making it seem like natural expressions of gratitude rather than calculated attempts to buy influence. But the eunuchs are also playing their own complex game. They're competing with each other for position and power, forming alliances and betraying them as circumstances change. The eunuch who smiles at you today might be the one who orchestrates your downfall tomorrow, if it serves his purposes. Then there are the other concubines, each representing a different type of threat. The established favourites who see you as a potential rival, the ambitious newcomers who might use you as a stepping stone to advancement, the desperate older concubines who might try to eliminate you to reduce competition, the connected ones whose families have political power outside the palace walls. You learn to navigate these relationships like a skilled diplomat, offering just enough friendship to avoid making enemies while maintaining enough distance to avoid getting caught up in their schemes. You share information selectively, offer support conditionally, and always remember that today's ally might be tomorrow's betrayer. The most dangerous concubines are the ones who have nothing left to lose. These are the women who have been in the harem for years without achieving significant rank, who are watching their youth and beauty fade, who are facing the prospect of spending their entire lives in service to more successful women. They're the ones most likely to take desperate risks, to fabricate scandals, to make accusations that could destroy innocent lives. You watch one of these women destroy a rising concubine with a carefully constructed rumour about disloyalty to the emperor. The accusation is completely false, but it's plausible enough to create doubt, and in the harem, doubt is often enough to end a career. The accused woman is investigated, found guilty of nothing, but her reputation is permanently damaged. She's moved to worse quarters, assigned to menial duties, and effectively eliminated from any chance of imperial favour. The lesson is clear. In the Forbidden City, truth is less important than perception, and perception can be manufactured, manipulated, and weaponized. You're not just competing for the Emperor's attention. You're fighting for your life in a war where the weapons are whispers, rumours, and carefully placed lies. After 18 months of waiting, it finally happens. The Emperor is coming to your courtyard, and you've been selected to serve tea during his visit. Your hands are shaking as you prepare. This is it. Your chance to make an impression, to catch his eye, to possibly change your fate forever. You've rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in your imagination, but now that it's actually happening, your mind goes blank and your carefully planned words dissolve into panic. The Emperor arrives with his entourage of guards, advisors, and eunuchs. He's smaller than you expected, more ordinary looking, but the power radiating from him is unmistakable. Every person in the courtyard is focused on him with laser-like intensity, hanging on his every word, analysing his every expression. You're in the presence of someone who can have you killed with a gesture, and that knowledge makes your knees weak. You approach with the tea service, moving with the careful grace you've practiced until it became second nature. You keep your eyes lowered, your movements precise, your breathing controlled. This is your moment, the culmination of months of preparation, the opportunity that thousands of other women would kill for. The Emperor glances at you as you pour his tea. For exactly 3 seconds, his eyes meet yours. You see intelligence there, calculation, and something else. A profound weariness that comes from having absolute power over millions of people. Then he looks away, continuing his conversation with his advisors about grain shipments and tax revenues. That's it. 3 seconds. Your entire future hanging in the balance, and you get 3 seconds of acknowledgement from the person who controls your destiny. But those 3 seconds are enough to change everything. Later that evening, a eunuch appears at your quarters with news that makes your heart stop. The Emperor has requested your presence in his chambers tomorrow night. The other concubines in your room react with a mixture of congratulations and barely concealed envy. They help you prepare, sharing advice and cosmetics, but you can feel the shift in their attitudes towards you. You're no longer just another bottom-tier concubine. You're a potential threat, a competitor who has suddenly moved several spaces ahead in the game. You spend the day in a state of nervous anticipation that borders on nausea. Everything you've heard about imperial encounters runs through your mind. The protocol, the expectations, the ways things can go wrong. Other concubines have shared stories about women who pleased the Emperor and were elevated to higher ranks. But they've also whispered about those who disappointed him and were never seen again. When evening comes, you're escorted to the Emperor's chambers by a silent eunuch. The room is magnificent, silk hangings, precious artwork, furniture that costs more than your entire village could earn in a lifetime. But all of that fades into the background when you see the Emperor waiting for you. He's not the godlike figure from the morning ceremony. He's tired, stressed, and looking at you with an expression that makes it clear you're just another in a long line of women who have stood in this same spot. You're not special, you're not unique, and you're not going to be the one who changes his life or captures his heart. What happens next is both more and less than you expected. The Emperor is neither cruel nor kind, he's simply efficient. You're there to serve a purpose, to provide a brief distraction from the crushing weight of imperial responsibility. Your performance is adequate, your beauty is acceptable, and your conversation is pleasant enough. When it's over, you're dismissed with the same casual indifference he might show to a servant who had brought him dinner. No promises, no special treatment, no indication that this encounter was anything more than a routine imperial duty. You return to your quarters in a daze, unsure whether you've just experienced the greatest triumph or the most devastating disappointment of your life. The other concubines pepper you with questions you can't answer, trying to extract information that might help them understand what the Emperor prefers, what he responds to, what might improve their own chances. But you have no insights to share, no secret knowledge to impart. You've learned that being chosen by the Emperor is both everything and nothing, a validation of your worth that comes with no guarantee of future consideration. 3 months after your encounter with the Emperor, you discover you're pregnant. The news hits you like a physical blow. You're sitting in your shared room when the nausea that's been plaguing you for weeks suddenly makes perfect sense. Your monthly bleeding has stopped, your breasts are tender, and you're experiencing the unmistakable signs of carrying a child. The Emperor's child. Your first emotion isn't joy, it's terror. Pregnancy in the imperial harem is both a blessing and a curse, a chance for advancement that comes with deadly risks. If you carry the child to term and it's a boy, you could be elevated to a higher rank, given better quarters, and secured a place in the hierarchy. If it's a girl, you'll receive some benefits, but not the protection that comes with producing a male heir. If you miscarry, you'll be back where you started, with the added burden of being seen as unlucky or cursed. But there are darker possibilities that keep you awake at night. Other concubines might see your pregnancy as a threat to their own ambitions. There are whispers of women who have suffered accidents during their pregnancies, who have been given herbal teas that caused miscarriages, who have been pushed downstairs or poisoned by jealous rivals. The imperial physicians confirm your condition with the same detached professionalism they might use to diagnose a head cold. You're moved to slightly better quarters, not because you're special, but because you're now carrying potential imperial property. Your diet is monitored, your activities are restricted, and you're assigned a personal servant whose job is to keep you healthy and report on your condition. The pregnancy is miserable. You're nauseous constantly, exhausted by the simplest tasks, and dealing with a range of physical discomforts that make every day a struggle. But the physical suffering is nothing compared to the psychological torment of not knowing whether you're carrying a future emperor or a future disappointment. You're also dealing with the changed dynamics in your relationships with other concubines. Some treat you with new respect, recognizing that you might soon outrank them. Others barely conceal their hostility, seeing you as an obstacle to their own advancement. A few try to befriend you, hoping to benefit from your potential rise in status. The Emperor doesn't visit you during your pregnancy. Why would he? You're performing your biological function, and his attention is needed elsewhere. You're not a person to him. You're a vessel, a means to an end, a piece of imperial infrastructure that's temporarily out of service. The months drag by with agonizing slowness. You're living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for an outcome that will determine the rest of your life. Every day brings new physical discomforts, new anxieties, new rumours about what might happen to you and your child. When the labour pains begin, you're attended by imperial midwives who are more concerned with saving the baby than saving you. If you die in childbirth, you'll be replaced within days. If the baby dies, you'll be blamed for failing in your most important duty. The only scenario in which you truly matter is if you successfully produce a healthy male heir. And even then, your value is entirely dependent on your child's survival and success. The birth is a nightmare of pain, blood and fear. You're surrounded by women who are strangers to you, who have no emotional investment in your survival, who are simply performing their professional duties. You scream, you pray, you curse the day you were selected for this life, and you push with every ounce of strength you possess. When it's over, when the baby's cry fills the room, you lie there, gasping and bleeding, waiting to learn whether you've just saved your life or sealed your fate. The midwife holds up the baby, and you see the expression on her face before she even speaks. It's a girl. Your daughter is beautiful, healthy, and worthless. Well, not worthless exactly. She's imperial property, a princess of the blood, and she'll receive an education and eventual marriage arrangement that reflects her status. But she's not the male heir that would have elevated you to a position of real security and influence. She's a consolation prize in a game where second place is still a form of losing. You're moved to better quarters, not palatial, but a significant improvement over the shared room you occupied before. You have your own space, a wet nurse for the baby, and servants to attend to your needs. Your rank has been elevated from selected lady to concubine, which sounds impressive until you realise you're still 9 levels below the Empress and 7 levels below the women who actually have meaningful influence. The Emperor visits once to see his daughter. He holds her for approximately 30 seconds, makes a few polite comments about her health and appearance, and then hands her back to the wet nurse. He doesn't look at you, doesn't acknowledge your suffering during the pregnancy and birth, doesn't thank you for producing his child. You're simply the woman who happened to be carrying his daughter, and now that the delivery is complete, you're no longer particularly relevant to his concerns. Your daughter will be raised primarily by servants and tutors. You'll see her regularly, but you won't be her primary caregiver. She belongs to the imperial family, not to you, and her education and upbringing will be determined by palace officials who have never changed a diaper or comforted a crying baby. You're allowed to love her, but you're not allowed to truly mother her. The other concubines treat you with the complex mixture of respect and resentment that comes with partial success. You've achieved more than most of them ever will, but you haven't achieved enough to be truly threatening. You're in the middle tier now, significant enough to be noticed, but not powerful enough to be feared. Your daily routine changes dramatically. Instead of waiting passively for imperial attention, you're now managing a small household, overseeing your daughter's care and navigating the complex social dynamics of your new status. You have responsibilities, but they're all related to maintaining your position rather than advancing further. You quickly learn that having a daughter creates new vulnerabilities. She's a potential target for rivals who might harm her to hurt you. She's also a potential asset who might be used against you if you fall from favour. Your love for her becomes another form of control, another way the system can manipulate and constrain you. The Emperor has other daughters, dozens of them, born to various concubines over the years. Most of them live quiet, unremarkable lives, educated but not particularly influential, married off to appropriate nobility when they reach maturity. A few might catch their father's attention and receive special treatment, but most are just pleasant furniture in the imperial household. You realise that your daughter's future is largely out of your hands. Her success will depend on her own intelligence, beauty, and political skills, as well as factors completely beyond anyone's control. The Emperor's mood, the political climate, the rise and fall of various court factions. All you can do is try to prepare her for a life where her worth will be determined by others, and her happiness will depend on circumstances she can't control. But at least she's alive and healthy and loved. In the brutal arithmetic of imperial concubinage, that's more than many women achieve. You've managed to create something meaningful in a system designed to make you meaningless, and that's a victory of sorts. The question now is whether you'll be content with this partial success, or whether you'll risk everything trying to achieve more. You're still young enough to have more children, still beautiful enough to attract the Emperor's attention again, but you're also old enough to understand the odds, smart enough to recognise the dangers, and experienced enough to know that sometimes the safest course is to be grateful for what you have, rather than reaching for what you want. 5 years have passed since your daughter's birth, and you're beginning to understand the cruelest aspect of life in the imperial harem, the slow, inexorable process of becoming invisible. You're now 24, which in the context of imperial concubinage makes you practically middle-aged. New girls arrive regularly, 14 and 15 years old, with fresh faces and the kind of dewy beauty that makes you feel ancient by comparison. You watch them go through the same process you experienced, the selection, the processing, the desperate waiting for attention, and you remember what it felt like to have that kind of hope. Your daughter is thriving, growing into a bright, curious child who speaks multiple languages and can already read better than most adults. She's beautiful, taking after both you and her father, and she has the kind of natural charm that makes people want to please her. But she's also learning the harsh realities of imperial life, developing the political instincts that will be essential for her survival. The Emperor has had 3 more sons since your daughter's birth, born to different concubines. Each new prince represents a shift in the palace dynamics, a recalibration of influence and power. The mothers of these boys have been elevated to higher ranks, receiving the kind of treatment and security that you can only dream of. Meanwhile, you maintain your position as a middle-tier concubine, comfortable but not particularly important. Your daily life has settled into a routine that's both pleasant and depressing. You oversee your daughter's education, manage your small household, and participate in the social rituals that mark the passage of time in the Forbidden City. You attend ceremonies, pay respects to higher-ranking concubines, and maintain the delicate web of relationships that keeps you safe and fed. But you're also watching yourself become irrelevant. The Emperor hasn't visited you in over 2 years, and when you encounter him at official functions, he looks through you rather than at you. You're not offensive or troublesome enough to be eliminated, but you're not interesting enough to be remembered. You're transitioning from being a woman to being a piece of furniture, functional, occasionally useful, but ultimately forgettable. The newer concubines treat you with polite respect, but you can see in their eyes that they consider you a cautionary tale rather than a role model. You're what they're afraid of becoming, a woman who achieved partial success and then watched it slowly slip away. You're living proof that beauty fades, that imperial favour is temporary, and that the system will eventually grind down everyone who isn't exceptional. You've begun to understand why some of the older concubines become bitter and cruel. It's not just jealousy, it's the psychological defence mechanism of people who have been systematically devalued and discarded. When society tells you that your only worth comes from your youth and beauty, and both of those things are inevitably temporary, the natural response is to either accept your meaninglessness or find ways to make other people feel equally worthless. But you're determined not to become one of those women. You've seen how their bitterness poison their relationships with their children, how their resentment makes them allies of no one and enemies of everyone. You want to model a different path for your daughter, to show her that it's possible to find meaning and dignity even in a system designed to strip both away. You start focusing more on your daughter's education, using your access to imperial tutors and libraries to give her advantages that most women in the empire could never dream of. You teach her languages, history, literature, and philosophy. More importantly, you teach her how to navigate the complex social dynamics of imperial life, how to be charming without being threatening, how to be intelligent without being intimidating. You also begin to cultivate relationships with other concubines who have daughters, creating informal networks of mutual support and information sharing. These women understand the unique challenges of raising girls in the imperial system, and together you work to prepare your children for lives that will be both privileged and constrained. The irony isn't lost on you that your declining personal significance is coinciding with your growing understanding of how to survive in this environment. You've finally learned to play the game effectively, just as you're becoming too old to win it. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the real victory isn't advancing in the hierarchy, but learning to find meaning and purpose, even when the system has decided you're expendable. Your daughter is now 12 years old, and the conversations about her future have begun in earnest. She's grown into a stunning young woman who combines your beauty with her father's intelligence and a natural charisma that makes her stand out, even among the imperial princesses. She speaks fluent Chinese, Mongolian and Tibetan, can compose poetry that would impress court scholars, and has a grasp of political strategy that would serve her well in any context. She's also developing the kind of personal magnetism that suggests she might be able to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics more successfully than you ever could. The Emperor has begun to notice her, not as a potential romantic interest, she's his daughter after all, but as a valuable political asset. Imperial princesses are typically married off to cement alliances, to reward loyal officials, or to manage relationships with tributary states. Your daughter's exceptional beauty and intelligence make her particularly valuable in these negotiations, but they also make her a target for ambitious families who want to secure an advantageous match. You watch her during official ceremonies, observing how she carries herself with the perfect balance of confidence and deference that imperial life demands. She's learned to be charming without being forward, intelligent without being threatening, and beautiful without being vain. She's mastered the art of making people feel special while maintaining her own dignity, a skill that took you years to develop and that she seems to have absorbed naturally. But you can also see the toll that this life is taking on her. She's 12 years old, and she's already calculating political angles, analysing social dynamics, and managing relationships with the strategic mind of a career diplomat. She's never had a childhood in any meaningful sense. She's been preparing for her role as a political asset since she was old enough to understand language. The discussions about her marriage prospects have begun among the court officials, and you're not included in these conversations. Your daughter's future will be determined by political considerations that have nothing to do with her preferences, your wishes, or even her happiness. She'll be married to whoever serves the Empire's interests best, and her personal feelings about the arrangement will be considered irrelevant. You try to prepare her for this reality without crushing her spirit. You explain that marriage, for women in your position, is a duty rather than a choice, but that it's possible to find happiness and fulfillment even in circumstances you didn't choose. You teach her how to evaluate potential husbands, not for romantic compatibility, but for character, intelligence, and the likelihood that they'll treat her with respect. But privately, you're terrified. You've spent 12 years protecting your daughter from the worst aspects of imperial life, creating a bubble of safety and love around her that you know is temporary. Soon, she'll be sent away to live with strangers, to serve political purposes she had no role in creating, to spend her life trying to please people who see her primarily as a means to an end. The Emperor summons you to discuss your daughter's future, the first private conversation you've had with him in years. He's aged significantly, looking tired and worn down by the constant pressure of ruling an empire. He regards you with the polite indifference of someone trying to remember where he's seen you before. Your daughter shows promise, he says, as if commenting on the weather. We're considering several marriage arrangements that would serve the empire well. He outlines the potential matches: a young general whose family has been loyal to the imperial house for generations, a provincial governor's son who could help secure a rebellious region, a foreign prince whose marriage to an imperial princess would cement a crucial trade agreement. Each option is presented in terms of political advantage, economic benefit, or strategic necessity. You listen in silence, because that's what's expected of you. You're not being consulted. You're being informed. Your opinion about what would make your daughter happy is as irrelevant as your feelings about the weather in distant provinces. When he finishes, you manage to ask one question: will she have any choice in the matter? The Emperor looks at you with something that might be surprise, as if the question itself reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world works. She'll have the choice that all imperial princesses have, he says. The choice to serve the empire honourably, or to bring shame to her family. I trust she'll choose wisely. That night, you hold your daughter while she cries, understanding for the first time that her childhood is officially over. She's old enough now to comprehend what her future holds, intelligent enough to recognise the constraints that will define her life, and mature enough to grieve for the autonomy she'll never have. The marriage negotiations for your daughter unfold over 6 months, a complex dance of diplomacy that treats her like a commodity being appraised and traded. You're not involved in the formal discussions, but you hear fragments of information from servants, eunuchs, and other concubines who pick up intelligence from various sources. The potential suitors are evaluated not for their compatibility with your daughter, but for their family's political usefulness, their regional influence, and their ability to advance imperial interests. The young general emerges as the frontrunner, largely because his family controls several key military garrisons, and his marriage to an imperial princess would solidify their loyalty. He's 26 years old, reportedly intelligent and well-educated, and comes from a family with a reputation for treating their women reasonably well. As imperial marriages go, this could be much worse. But you can't shake the knowledge that your daughter will be sent hundreds of miles away to live among strangers, that you might see her once or twice a year if you're lucky, that she'll be expected to produce heirs for a family that views her primarily as a political asset. She'll be surrounded by people who will judge her success based on her ability to manage household politics, bear sons, and reflect well on the imperial family. Your daughter handles the uncertainty with a maturity that breaks your heart. She asks intelligent questions about her potential husband's character, his family's reputation, and the region where she'll be living. She's preparing herself mentally for a life she didn't choose, approaching her fate with the same strategic thinking she might apply to a chess match. "Will you miss me?" she asks one evening, and the question nearly destroys you. Every day, you tell her, but I'll also be proud of you every day. You're going to do things I never could have imagined when I was your age. Will I ever see you again? You want to lie to offer false comfort, but you've always been honest with her about the realities of your world. I don't know, you admit, but I'll always love you, and I'll always be grateful that I got to be your mother. The formal betrothal is announced during a court ceremony that you're allowed to attend, but not participate in. Your daughter stands beside the emperor, beautiful and composed, while the details of her marriage are read aloud like a business contract. The dowry, the ceremonial gifts, the timeline for the wedding, the expectations for her conduct in her new family, everything is spelled out with bureaucratic precision. You watch from the back of the hall, one anonymous concubine among dozens, and try to memorize every detail of your daughter's face. She looks regal, dignified, and heartbreakingly young. She's been trained for this moment her entire life, but she's still just a 12-year-old girl being traded for political advantage. After the ceremony, you're allowed a few minutes alone with her before she's whisked away for more formal obligations. She hugs you tightly, and you can feel her trembling despite her outward composure. I'll write to you, she promises, though you both know that letters between her new home and the Forbidden City will be read by multiple people before reaching their intended recipients. Be smart, you tell her. Be kind when you can, but be strong when you have to. Remember that you carry our love with you, even when we're not there. She nods, straightening her shoulders and assuming the composed expression that will become her default mask in her new life. At 12 years old, she's already more politically sophisticated than most adults, and she's about to need every bit of that intelligence to survive in an environment that will be even more challenging than the one she's leaving. The silence in your quarters after your daughter's departure is deafening. For 13 years, your identity has been shaped by motherhood, your daily routine organised around her needs, your hopes and fears focused on her welfare. Now suddenly, you're just another aging concubine in a palace full of younger, more beautiful women who are competing for attention you'll never receive again. The emperor doesn't visit anymore. Why would he? You've served your biological purpose, and there are dozens of newer concubines who might still produce useful heirs. At 29, you're considered past your prime, in a system that values women primarily for their fertility and their ability to please men who have unlimited choices. Your daughter writes occasionally, carefully crafted letters that reveal almost nothing about her actual experiences. She's learned to communicate in the coded language of imperial correspondence, where "I am adjusting well to my new circumstances" might mean anything from genuine contentment to desperate misery. You read between the lines, analysing every word choice for clues about her emotional state, but you'll probably never know how she's really doing. You're assigned new duties that reflect your diminished status, overseeing the education of younger concubines, managing household logistics, serving as a chaperone during official functions. These responsibilities are meaningful enough to keep you busy, but not important enough to give you any real influence. You're becoming part of the imperial infrastructure, a useful cog in the massive machine that keeps the Forbidden City functioning. The other concubines in your age cohort are dealing with similar transitions. Some have become bitter, using their knowledge of palace politics to make life difficult for younger women. Others have found peace in religious practice, spending hours in meditation and prayer. A few have formed tight friendships with each other, creating support networks that help them navigate their irrelevance with dignity. You choose a different path. You become a mentor to the newer concubines, teaching them the survival skills you've learned through painful experience. You show them how to navigate the complex social hierarchies, how to protect themselves from the worst predators, how to find meaning and purpose even when the system treats them as disposable. This work gives you a sense of purpose that you haven't felt since your daughter left. You can't change the fundamental nature of the imperial harem, but you can help individual women survive it with their humanity intact. You become known as someone who can be trusted with secrets, who offers practical advice without judgment, who understands the unique pressures of life in the Forbidden City. The irony isn't lost on you that your declining personal significance coincides with your growing wisdom about how to navigate this environment. You've finally learned to play the game effectively, just as you've become too old to win it in any conventional sense. But perhaps that's exactly what qualifies you to teach others. You understand both the potential rewards and the inevitable disappointments that come with imperial concubinage. You also begin to cultivate relationships with the palace eunuchs, particularly those responsible for communications and logistics. These men have often spent decades in the Forbidden City, and they've developed their own networks and sources of information. They remember your daughter fondly, and some of them are willing to share occasional updates about her welfare in exchange for small favours and respectful treatment. Through these informal channels, you learn that your daughter is adapting well to her new life. She's managed to win the respect of her husband's family, she's bearing children successfully, and she's using her intelligence and charm to build influence in her new environment. She's surviving, and perhaps even thriving, in circumstances that would have destroyed a less prepared person. This knowledge brings you a kind of peace you didn't expect. You've accomplished something meaningful in a system designed to make you meaningless. You've raised a daughter who is strong enough, smart enough, and adaptable enough to create her own form of success in whatever circumstances she faces. That's a legacy worth having, even if no one will ever write it down in the official histories. At 35, you've achieved something that would have seemed impossible during your first years in the Forbidden City. You've become genuinely invisible to the Emperor, and you've discovered that invisibility is a form of freedom. You no longer wake up each morning hoping for imperial attention. You don't spend hours preparing for encounters that will never happen, or analysing every rumour for signs that your fortunes might change. You've accepted your position in the hierarchy, and that acceptance has freed you to focus on things that actually matter: relationships, knowledge, and the small acts of kindness that make life in the palace bearable. Your quarters have become an informal counselling centre where younger concubines come to seek advice about everything from palace politics to personal relationships. You've developed a reputation as someone who listens without judging, who offers practical wisdom without trying to advance her own agenda, who understands the system well enough to help others navigate it successfully. You've also become something of a scholar, spending your free time in the palace libraries, studying history, philosophy, and literature. The education you received as a child was limited by your family's poverty and your society's assumptions about what women needed to know. But now you have access to books that most people in the Empire will never see. And you're using that access to expand your understanding of the world beyond the Forbidden City's walls. Through your reading, you've begun to understand the historical context of your own experiences. The imperial harem system has existed for centuries, evolving and adapting, but maintaining the same basic structure: women as political assets, beauty as currency, and male power as the organising principle of society. You're not suffering through some unique ordeal. You're participating in a pattern that has shaped the lives of countless women before you. This historical perspective brings both comfort and sadness. Comfort because you realise that your struggles and adaptations are part of a larger human story about survival and resilience. Sadness because you understand how little has changed, how the fundamental inequalities that define your life have persisted across generations. You've also begun to develop relationships with some of the older eunuchs, men who have spent their entire adult lives serving the imperial family. These relationships are complex. They're neither friendships nor alliances, but something in between. You share the experience of being permanent outsiders in a world that values you only for your usefulness, and that shared experience creates a kind of understanding that transcends the formal hierarchies of palace life. One of these eunuchs, a man named Wei who has served 3 different emperors, becomes a particular confidant. He's intelligent, well-read, and surprisingly philosophical about the strange life he's chosen. Through him, you learn about the broader political currents that shape life in the Forbidden City, the economic pressures that influence imperial policy, and the personal struggles of the imperial family members who appear so powerful from your perspective. The Emperor is as trapped as any of us, Wei tells you one evening as you're discussing the latest court intrigue. He can have any woman he wants, but he can never choose his own life. He can order anyone's death, but he can never escape his own responsibilities. Power is just another kind of prison. This conversation changes how you think about your own situation. You've spent years focusing on what you've lost: your freedom, your family, your youth, your daughter, but you've never considered what you've gained. You've learned languages, studied philosophy, raised a remarkable daughter, and developed wisdom about human nature that most people never acquire. You've survived in one of the most challenging environments imaginable, and you've done it with your integrity intact. You're not saying the trade-off was worth it. You would still choose a different life if you could go back and make that choice. But you're beginning to understand that meaning can be found even in circumstances you didn't choose, that dignity can be maintained even when others try to strip it away, and that small acts of compassion can create ripple effects that last long after the powerful people of your era are forgotten. You're now 42, officially an elder in the imperial harem, and you're watching a new generation of concubines navigate the same treacherous waters you survived decades ago. These young women are different from your cohorts. They're more educated, more politically aware, and more strategic in their approach to imperial life. Some of this is because times are changing. The empire is modernizing, foreign influences are growing stronger, and traditional ways of doing things are being questioned. But much of it is because of the informal education network that you and other experienced concubines have created. The new girls still arrive, terrified and confused, but they're quickly taken under the wings of women who understand the system intimately. They learn survival strategies that took your generation years to develop. They avoid pitfalls that destroyed many of your contemporaries, and they approach their circumstances with a level of sophistication that impresses even the eunuchs. You've become a kind of unofficial dean of this shadow academy. Young concubines seek you out for advice about everything from makeup techniques to political manoeuvring. You teach them how to read the subtle signs that indicate shifting alliances, how to build relationships with the eunuchs who control access and information, how to present themselves as valuable without being threatening. But you also teach them things that go beyond mere survival. You share the literature and philosophy you've discovered in the palace libraries, encouraging them to develop their minds as well as their beauty. You help them understand the historical context of their situation, so they can see themselves as part of a larger human story, rather than victims of arbitrary cruelty. Most importantly, you teach them how to maintain their sense of self in a system designed to erase individuality. You show them how to find meaning and purpose, even when others treat them as objects. How to build genuine relationships in an environment built on competition and betrayal. How to prepare for futures they can't control or predict. Some of these young women will achieve the kind of success you never could. They'll become imperial favourites, bear sons who become princes, gain real political influence. Others will follow paths more similar to yours, finding meaning in smaller victories and quieter forms of resistance. All of them will face challenges you can't anticipate, because the world is changing in ways that make your experiences both relevant and outdated. You receive a letter from your daughter, now 25, and the mother of 3 children. She writes about her life in carefully neutral terms, but you can read between the lines well enough to understand that she's achieved something remarkable. She's found a way to be genuinely happy in circumstances she didn't choose. Her marriage, arranged for political purposes, has evolved into something resembling partnership. Her children are healthy and bright. Her influence in her new family has grown steadily, and she's using that influence to improve conditions for other women in her household. She also writes about the changes she's seeing in the broader world. Foreign ideas about women's roles are beginning to influence even traditional families. Young people are questioning arrangements their parents accepted without thought. The rigid hierarchies that defined your life are showing signs of flexibility that would have been unimaginable when you were her age. I think about you often, she writes, and I try to raise my daughters with the wisdom you gave me. I want them to understand that strength can take many forms, that dignity doesn't depend on other people's recognition, and that love can survive even when circumstances try to destroy it. Reading this letter, you realise that your life has achieved a kind of success that the imperial system never measures or rewards. You've helped create a generation of women who are stronger, smarter, and more resilient than their predecessors. You've passed on knowledge that will help them navigate challenges you can't imagine. You've planted seeds that will continue growing long after you're gone. It's not the kind of legacy that gets recorded in official histories or commemorated with monuments, but it's real, and it matters, and it's entirely yours. You're 50 now, ancient by concubine standards, and the empire around you is transforming in ways that make your early years in the Forbidden City seem like ancient history. Foreign ambassadors visit regularly, bringing ideas about governance, technology, and social organisation that challenge traditional Chinese assumptions. Young officials, educated in both classical Chinese philosophy and foreign universities, are advocating for reforms that would have been considered treasonous when you first arrived. Even within the Forbidden City, changes are visible. Electric lights are being installed, telegraphs connect the palace to distant provinces, and some of the more progressive eunuchs are experimenting with foreign administrative techniques. The emperor himself is aging and increasingly reliant on advisors who understand the modern world better than he does. His newest concubines are selected not just for beauty, but for their education and their families' connections to the changing political landscape. Some of them speak foreign languages, understand international trade, and bring perspectives that reflect the Empire's growing engagement with the outside world. You watch these developments with the complex feelings of someone who has lived through a historical transition. Part of you is excited by the possibilities these changes represent. Maybe future generations of women will have more choices, more autonomy, more opportunity to shape their own lives. But part of you is also sceptical, understanding how slowly deep structures change and how often reforms benefit the powerful while leaving the powerless in familiar forms of subjugation. Your role in the harem has evolved again. You're now one of the senior women, responsible for maintaining traditions and protocols that are becoming increasingly obsolete. You teach young concubines the proper forms of address, the correct ceremonies for various occasions, the subtle etiquette that governs interactions between different ranks. But you also find yourself explaining why these traditions exist, what purposes they serve, and how they might need to adapt to changing circumstances. Some of the younger concubines are beginning to question aspects of the system that your generation accepted as natural law. They ask why their education should focus primarily on arts that please men, rather than skills that might be useful in the emerging modern economy. They wonder why their success should depend entirely on their ability to bear sons rather than their own talents and achievements. They debate whether the hierarchical structure of the harem serves any purpose beyond maintaining male control over female sexuality. These conversations are dangerous, but they're also exhilarating. You find yourself articulating ideas that you've been thinking about for years, but never dared to express. You share insights about power, gender, and social organisation that come from decades of careful observation and hard-won experience. You help these young women understand the system they're trapped in without crushing their hopes for something better. You also begin to write. Nothing that could be considered subversive or revolutionary, just personal reflections on life in the imperial harem, observations about human nature under extreme circumstances, and philosophical musings about the relationship between individual dignity and social structure. You hide these writings carefully, knowing that they could be considered dangerous if discovered by the wrong people. But you also hope that someday, when the world has changed enough to make such perspectives valuable rather than threatening, someone might find these reflections and understand what life was like for women like you. You want there to be some record of the interior experience of imperial concubinage, some testimony to the humanity that persisted despite systematic efforts to reduce women to their biological and ornamental functions. Through your informal network of eunuchs and servants, you learn that similar changes are happening throughout the empire. Women in merchant families are beginning to participate more actively in business decisions. Female scholars are gaining recognition for their intellectual achievements. Young people from traditional families are choosing their own marriage partners, sometimes over their parents' objections. These changes are limited, tentative, and often met with fierce resistance from conservative forces. But they're real, and they suggest that the rigid social structures that have defined Chinese society for centuries might be more flexible than anyone imagined. You think often about your daughter and what these changes might mean for your grandchildren. Will your granddaughters live in a world where their worth isn't determined entirely by their relationships to men? Will they have opportunities to develop their talents, pursue their interests, and shape their own destinies in ways that were unimaginable for women of your generation? You can't know the answers to these questions, but you can hope, and you can continue doing the work that has given your life meaning, helping the women around you navigate their current circumstances while preparing them for futures that might be very different from anything their mothers could have imagined. You're 63 now, one of the oldest women in the imperial harem, and you're preparing for the final transition of your remarkable life. Your health is declining, as is natural for someone who has lived through decades of stress, inadequate medical care, and the physical demands of life in the Forbidden City. But your mind remains sharp, your relationships are deep and meaningful, and your understanding of the human condition has been refined by experiences that few people could survive with their humanity intact. The empire around you has continued changing. The emperor is dead, replaced by his son, who is implementing reforms that would have been inconceivable when you first arrived. Some of the most rigid aspects of the harem system have been relaxed, and there's talk of more fundamental changes in how the imperial household manages its human relationships. Your daughter visits occasionally, now a powerful matriarch in her own family, respected for her wisdom and influence. She brings your grandchildren when she can, remarkable young people who are growing up in a world that offers them possibilities you could never have imagined. Your granddaughters are receiving educations that rival those of your grandsons, and they speak confidently about futures that they expect to choose for themselves. You would be proud of them, your daughter tells you during one of these visits. They have your strength, but they're growing up in a world where that strength can be used for their own purposes, rather than just for survival. You look at these young people, intelligent, confident, curious about the world beyond their immediate circumstances, and you feel a satisfaction that transcends the limitations of your own experience. You've helped create a link in a chain that connects the constrained women of your generation to the liberated women your grandchildren might become. The younger concubines still seek your advice, but now they're asking different questions. Instead of focusing solely on survival strategies, they want to understand how to prepare for a world that's changing faster than anyone can predict. Instead of accepting their circumstances as permanent, they're planning for futures that might include possibilities their predecessors could never have imagined. You share what wisdom you can, but you also encourage them to think beyond the limitations of your experience. The strategies that worked for your generation might not be relevant for theirs. The compromises you were forced to make might not be necessary for them. The constraints that defined your life might be obstacles they can overcome, rather than permanent features of the social landscape. In your private moments, you reflect on the strange trajectory of your life. You were selected for the imperial harem because of your beauty, reduced to your biological functions, and expected to find meaning primarily through your relationships to powerful men. But somehow, within those constraints, you managed to create something meaningful. Relationships built on genuine affection and mutual support, knowledge gained through careful study and observation, and influence exercised through teaching and mentoring rather than sexual attraction. You've learned that dignity can be maintained even when others try to strip it away. That meaning can be found even in circumstances you didn't choose, and that small acts of compassion can have effects that ripple through generations. You've discovered that there are many ways to resist oppression, and that sometimes the most effective resistance involves helping others navigate the system rather than trying to destroy it. Your life hasn't been the one you would have chosen if you'd had real choices at 14, but it's been a life worth living, filled with love, learning, growth, and the satisfaction of knowing that you've made a difference in ways that matter to you. As you prepare for whatever comes next, you feel a peace that you never expected to achieve. You've survived one of history's most challenging environments, with your humanity intact. You've raised a daughter who is thriving in circumstances you couldn't control. You've helped create a network of relationships and knowledge that will continue benefiting women long after you're gone. You've lived through a historical transition that has transformed not just the Forbidden City, but the entire empire and the world beyond its borders. You've seen rigid social structures begin to bend, witnessed the first stirrings of changes that might eventually lead to real equality, and contributed to those changes in ways that may never be recorded in official histories, but are no less real for being invisible. That's not a bad legacy for someone who was never supposed to matter to anyone, except as a beautiful object in an emperor's collection. You've proven that even in the most constrained circumstances, human beings can find ways to create meaning, maintain dignity, and build connections that transcend the limitations others try to impose. The Empire will continue changing long after you're gone. The structures that defined your life will evolve, adapt, and eventually disappear entirely. But the human capacity for resilience, compassion, and growth that you've witnessed and embodied will persist, creating possibilities for future generations that neither you nor they can fully imagine. And in the end, that might be the most important lesson of all, that change is possible, that dignity is inalienable, and that love, in all its forms, can survive even the most systematic attempts to destroy it. Sleep well, knowing that your story, like the stories of countless other women throughout history, is proof that the human spirit can find ways to flourish, even in the darkest circumstances. And remember that while individual lives may be constrained by the times and places in which they unfold, the courage, wisdom, and compassion those lives generate can echo across centuries, influencing people and possibilities that their creators could never have imagined. Sweet dreams, and thank you for taking this journey through one of history's most complex and challenging institutions. Tomorrow we'll explore another corner of the human experience, another story of survival and adaptation in circumstances that test the limits of what people can endure. Until then, rest well in your freedom, your choices, and your opportunities to shape your own destiny.